God bless you, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. And I'm blessed again to have as my guest for this second time, Steve Skojec from 1 Peter 5.
Hi, Joseph. How's it going?
Thank you. God bless you, Steve. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me again.
Sure thing.
Okay. After I talked to you the first time, you had published this article that I really liked. At the time you published it, I noted on my social media that I thought is the best blog post I'd read all year.
Wow.
And I think, yeah, it is. And I still believe it. We're here now, we're in November. This was from September 15th, 2020. And I think on the topic, I think it's really one of the best I've ever written. And I'll link it in the description of this video. And the title is No More Platitudes. It's time to take a hard look at the crisis of Catholicism. And you don't hear, well, you were born in, so you're younger than me. You were born in 77, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I was born in 69.
My birthday is tomorrow, in fact. I'm 43 years old as of tomorrow.
Oh, hey, God bless you. Happy
Thanks.
birthday. Wow. So I guess we're both Generation X.
Yeah, yeah.
I was going to call this video, I was trying to think of something. It's always difficult to come up with a title. So I was thinking of like Gen X Catholic.
It could work. It could work.
What you're describing with and what you're struggling with in this article is what I've been dealing with probably most of my life. Mm-hmm. And I think where's the most profound statement you made in here? I mean, there's a lot of them, but the one that I really loved, oh, here it is. This is kind of midway, kind of towards the end. Okay. I must be honest enough to admit that I have never for one moment in my life seen a healthy Catholic church. When I read that, I was like, yeah, wow.
Yeah, yeah. And I have to be honest, it's something that I keep thinking about a lot as a cradle Catholic, as somebody who, my parents were very young when they had me. They got married young. My mom had me at 19. So they were still kind of just kids. My dad was 24.
Sorry, Steve. Where were you born and mainly where were you raised?
I was born in upstate New York,
okay.
The Binghamton area of New York. We moved around a lot because my dad was in retail management, and so he got transferred a lot when I was a kid.
Okay.
And so we lived all over, New York and Pennsylvania, and then eventually we settled down in Connecticut for about 8 years before we went back to upstate New York, and we stayed there until I left for high school at a legionary school, which we've talked about in the past, and then for college. So New York, New England, that's where I grew up.
But Steve, sorry. I can imagine like the situation with Catholicism, at least on the parish level, probably on the East Coast, like in New England, was better than like what I was experiencing in San Francisco.
It probably was. I would assume that that's probably a safe bet, but that isn't to say that it was exactly healthy. I mean, there was a lot of silliness that was going on. And as a kid, I remember prepping for my first communion, and I'm in second grade. And the nun, who's teaching us is she's playing that song City of God on the boombox as we're practicing for communion. And I was 7 years old, and I'm like, what in the world is this crap? I'm not singing this. This is dumb. Like it was fruity already. And my parents, my dad came from a family of kind of Kennedy Catholics. They were much more along the lines of, my godparents, God bless them. My godfather has since passed away, but they were Democratic voters all the way up to Obama. That was my dad's side of the family. My mom's side was much more Orthodox, conservative Catholic, but not traditional. And so I grew up, Catholicism was always the framework of my life, and my parents became more devout over time. My grandparents, you went to their house and they were always praying the rosary and doing that. Like they were very actively Catholic. My mom is one of 8 kids. I mean, Catholicism formed the ethos of my childhood very much. But at the same time, it was always this sort of really fruity Catholicism that existed in most places. You know, it was the bad music and the plush carpeted churches. And, you know, I was taught to receive communion in the hand, like that was the only way. And, you know, those are the kinds of things that I grew up with.
Yeah.
And so, you know, over time, I found myself veering more and more towards Orthodox expressions of Catholicism. So I was 14, and I remember I was kneeling there, and we had this ugly tabernacle at the church that we were in. I mean, it just looked like it was melting, and it was just, you know, one of those bronze monstrosities out of the 70s. And I remember kneeling there and saying, you know, I know I'm supposed to believe you're here, but nobody acts like you're here. Like nobody acts like you're truly present. And I don't know what to think, but it's not working for me anymore. And so that was, you know, as a teenager. And then shortly thereafter, you know, having made the request of help me figure this out, I found the Legion, and they at least were superficially Orthodox. And then they turned out to be who the Legion was. But going down that road, it was just a process of and then it was parish shopping. I was trying to find the place I could kneel to receive communion. I was trying to find the place that did Gregorian chant, and over a period of time wound up in tradition. But looking back on that journey at midlife now, what I see is I have had to struggle and scrabble to find a Catholicism that makes sense. The church has never been healthy in my life. And most places, I mean, anybody who's ever played parish roulette, as I call it, knows you're traveling, you're in a city, you grab a phone book, you're like, where's the nearest Catholic church? You look, you go there, and it's like, there was this, you would actually appreciate this story. So there was a time I went to a wedding in Reno, Nevada.
Wow.
And it, you know, it's been a while now. It's been about 18 years. But I'm there, and my buddy and I are staying in this hotel, and we're looking for a parish, and he picks one out. So we go to this parish, and they had a projector, you know, like they had in school, the transparency projectors where they would put stuff up on the wall.
Overhead, yeah.
Yeah, the overhead projector, that's what it is. And they had the lyrics to whatever the ridiculous song is that they were singing.
Totally.
And they were projecting them on the back wall of the sanctuary, you know? Yeah. And it was like with a pen, they were doing like the little bouncing ball thing, you know, as they went through the lyrics like they used to do on the animations. Now, of course, at this point in my life, I mean, I'm a college graduate. I was not a fan of this kind of stuff, but Joseph, I was laughing so hard.
Oh, dear.
I mean, I was convulsing with laughter in the pew. And I look at my friend, and he was so mad because he was the one who picked the church. He was just so angry. But it was like, you know, you get to a point where it's just comical how bad it is. If you go to any random Catholic church on a Sunday, that's probably what you're going to get. And so just reflecting a lot on, you know, the liturgical heterodoxy, the theological heterodoxy, the felt banners, the Eucharistic irreverence, you know, the introduction of altar girls, the split between the pre and post conciliar liturgy and theology, and then on top of it, the abuse crisis that just seemed to go on and on and on. And it's like, what does it look like to have a Catholic church that I can be proud of? I've always been looking for it, and I've never actually found it.
Yeah, it's difficult. Coming from a history background, I like context. So I just want to describe like some of the dumping ground that we're dealing with. So I looked at Pew Research. I looked at Gallup. Those I think are very reputable. This is what Pew said. Catholicism has experienced a greater net loss due to religious switching than has any other religious tradition in the U.S. Overall, 13% of all U.S. adults are former Catholics. People who say they were raised in the faith but now identify as religious knowns or Protestants or other religion. By contrast, 2% of U.S. adults are converts to Catholicism. People who now identify as Catholic ever having been raised in another religion or a non-religion. This means that there are 6.5 former Catholics in the U.S. for every convert to the faith. No other religious group analyzed in the 2014 Religious Landscape Study has experienced anything close to this ratio of losses to gains via religious switching. So that's Pew. Here's
Yeah.
Gallup. Here's Gallup. From 2014 to 2017, an average of 39% of Catholics reported attending church in the past 7 days. This is down from an average of 45% from 2005 to 2008 and represents a steep decline of 75% since 1955. Now, this is what just surprised me because, you know, when you talk about decline in church attendance and membership of the Catholic Church, people always say, well, you know, the Protestants, the bottom has fallen out there too. I was surprised to read this. By contrast, the 45% of Protestants who reported attending church weekly from 2014 to 2017 is essentially unchanged from a decade ago.
What did they say the number was for Catholics who go every week?
39%.
I've actually seen some numbers indicating lower than that.
Lower,
who
in the
go
20s.
well, I should say who go every Sunday. It's in the 20s is what I've seen recently. So
yeah, and here it says, as Gallup first reported in 2009, the steepest decline in church attendance among U.S. Catholics occurred between the 1950s and the 1970s, when the percentage saying that they had attended the church in the past 7 days fell more than 20 percentage points. It then fell an average of 4 points per decade through the mid-1990s before stabilizing in the mid-200s. Now, this is interesting. Since then, the downward trend has resumed, and the percentage attending in the past week following another 6 points in the past decade.
Yeah, and if you want to have a depressing hour or so of you know, passing the time, go to Georgetown University has the it's called the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, CARA, and they have statistics on the Catholic Church. I don't know when they start. I think but I mean, you can compare 1950s to the 1970s or 1980s, and the loss is exponential. And it's not just people who aren't going to church; it's the number of religious who left, the number of priests who left. You know, the Catholic population still keeps technically going up, even though you're losing people. But the number
I was a little boy. Sorry, Steve. I was a little boy in the 70s, and I don't really remember it. But my mother tells stories of going. We lived right near the Catholic parish, and where the Catholic school was. And my mother remembers showing up. She volunteered in the office or something. And one day, the nun or the sister was in a full habit. And she came in the next day, my mother, and the nun was like in a turtleneck and a mini skirt.
Jeez,
it was
yeah.
It was like that shocking.
There's no transition point. It's just, night and day.
Well, how do you do it anyway?
Well, I mean, you would think that they would have at least had, you know, the polyester phase for a little while, you know, where they did like those tans and, you know, the earth tone polyester nun thing that happened after the full habits. And then you transition to the turtleneck with the giant, you know, faux bead necklaces and stuff. But yeah.
No, but I one of the interesting people I've met in San Francisco, I've met so many interesting people, but is an ex-Dominican nun.
Okay.
And she talked to me, I'm getting on a tangent, but she told me, because I asked her, I said, what happened, you know, in that period? Because I was a little kid in the 70s. And she just said, those of us that wanted to leave and get married and have a family, because the way they had changed the religious life, it was like not a community.
Yeah.
They were just like social workers and teachers living together. You know, that was it. She said, we all left. And she said, pretty much, I hate to be blunt, but pretty much the lesbians and the really hardcore social justice warriors stayed. Those
right. Which is weird. I mean, it's like, why do they stay? They know what the church teaches. If you feel liberated from this stuff, go do your own thing. Like, why do you have to stay here and make this worse? I don't understand that.
Well, because then if they would leave, they don't have a forum. They would just be another LGBT angry activist. You know, if you stay in the church, you have an audience, a forum. I mean, that's the same thing with the priests. But anyway, it's another story. I want to get back to your article. You talked about how your Catholic identity. You talked about how it's all you ever knew, and then you wrote, "I don't even know who I am anymore if you don't have Catholicism."
Yeah.
That I can relate to that too. I mean, I was raised marginally Catholic as a kid, was not Catholic most of my life as my adulthood. Came back to the church in 1999. So I've been Catholic for 20 years. But I mean, I get that because, especially with my friends, everything that I think, do, associate, read is Catholic.
Yeah.
And the only I can compare it to is when I left gay. It's like when I was gay, I mean, everything was gay. I lived in a gay neighborhood. Well, there was a gay church. I went to the gay movie theater, read gay books, listened to gay music. Everything was gay. Gay magazines, gay newspapers, everything gay. So when you leave it, who the hell am I? What do I do? All my friends are gay. What? But Catholic is I hate to say it, in some sense is kind of a different cult, because everything I got into Catholicism was Catholic.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I mean, it becomes sort of the defining adjacent issue to whatever it is that you're doing. Everything is done within this frame of reference of either is it Catholic or is it Catholic acceptable, and so there's no area of your life that's left untouched by it. And especially I think because of the culture wars, Catholics that grew up, as Gen Xers, we've never known a church that wasn't ostensibly at war with the world while simultaneously being completely in bed with it. And so, when you live in these little enclaves of conservative Catholicism, it's like you have these distinguishing factors of like, well, we found the good priest and we found the good church and we found the people who are fighting the resistance, as opposed to the rest of the church. But it makes it so much more of a conscious thing. Like, oh, what Catholic school are you going to? You can't go to Georgetown because they're Jesuits, but you could go to Steubenville because, they're more Orthodox. And so it's this endless measuring of everything according to that yardstick. And it really is. I mean, it's a comprehensive identity.
And what's the ultimate irony with me, and the biggest joke on me, is I left the gay community, which had underlying issues, sex abuse,
mm-hmm.
and grooming and manipulation and predation. And I thought I was leaving that all behind, and then I went to the Catholic Church.
Yeah, that's got to have been wildly disappointing.
Oh my God. Well, anyway. I want to get into that a little bit when we talk about the McCarrick report. One thing, and you spent quite a bit of time talking about him in this article, which I thought was interesting, was Jordan Peterson, because he's somebody that I've listened to a long time and I've liked. I don't know if I took a different take from you did. You kind of made the point that well, you use that word too, uninhibited. That Jordan, you are attracted to Jordan Peterson so much because he's kind of uninhibited from any kind of like religious like context.
Yeah.
What I find really interesting about Jordan is that Jordan Peterson is kind of his basic message,
mm-hmm.
which really appeals. I mean, his primary audience is I would say men, and it's young men. So I think that's probably why I was attracted to him too. Is he has a very fatherly kind of countenance about him, because he says very like basic things like clean up your room, stand up straight, with your shoulders back, fix your what's the one I like? Oh, fix yourself before you start trying to change the world. These are like very basic sort of maxims that you would hear from your dad. But I mean, a lot of these young guys that are attracted to his message never heard that from their father, or didn't really have a father. And I kind of think he's important too, in terms of Catholicism, because I mean, you talked about his sort of religious sensibility in your article. I mean, I kind of see him too as a religious figure, because I mean, in Catholicism, we don't have simple, clean, sort of like messages of the truth. We don't hear it.
We don't hear
it. No. I mean,
he's kind of, in a way, I feel like he's sort of like the anti-Bishop Barron.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
Like Bishop Barron just wants to make you feel warm and fuzzy and invite you into this tangled web of whatever it is that he's
springtime of evangelism,
telling you about. And Peterson's just like, it's hard. It's damn hard, this thing you have to do. Like, it's just a totally different approach to the truth. It's here. I mean, for Peterson, it's almost like somebody's twisting his arm unseen, making him go toward the light, and he's constantly digging for that truth. And I feel like so many of the prelates in the church, they're trying to put up a smoke screen around the truth. They're like, well, that's a hard thing to accept, so maybe we don't want to talk about that so much. And Peterson's, out there going, the only thing that every human being can agree on is the reality of suffering. It is the one truth that we can't escape, because everyone knows what suffering is. Everyone knows what it means, and they can't escape it. And that's just like, you just don't hear that. Now, I'm a Jordan Peterson neophyte. I've just started paying more attention to him because of the prompting of some of my friends. I did a show yesterday with Cale Zeldin, who is a guy that I met through the work that I do, who's really been helping me to kind of contextualize a lot of this stuff that I hadn't paid attention to before. And he really led to me writing this piece, some of the conversations that we've had. But I do think you're right. I think Peterson is fundamentally a religious figure, even if he doesn't realize it. He is the uninhibitedness that I'm talking about. So this is a different sort of tack than what you were bringing up with Pew and Gallup and Catholics going away from the church. So I occupy this niche, this subset of the church, not just conservative Catholicism, but on top of that, traditional Catholicism. And it's very tribal. And there are all of these, purity tests that get administered all the time. If you don't do this, you're not part of the club. If, one of the things that gets thrown at me all the time is, you're not a real trad. If you were a real trad, you do this,
Yeah, you described in there, you're often wary, or you often have second thoughts about what you say or write.
Yeah.
Because you're not worried, but you're concerned about how other people will respond to it.
Yes. And so what it does is, I think it stifles intellectual curiosity in the pursuit of truth. I mentioned to Cale yesterday on our show that I had a teacher in high school, the first theology teacher I ever had, and it was an all-boys class. Most of our classes were not segregated, but this was an all-boys class. And he told us, you have to go after the truth like rabid dogs. And this was the guidance that he gave us. And so we had this Socratic method approach to, going through the catechism and understanding the faith, and it would get heated, and he would, put fuel on that fire, because we would be battling it out. And he's like, this is worth fighting over. This is important. Be men about this. Go after it. And that is a thing that I find that within these sort of constructed enclaves of orthodoxy, everybody's constantly looking for, to go back to Bishop Barron. A lot of people don't watch Bishop Barron to see what Bishop Barron has to say. That's good. They're looking for, what did he say that we can criticize? And we become theater critics about everything. Was this mass good enough? Was this theology actually on point? And there's an entire cottage industry of gotcha Catholic journalism that goes out looking for these mistakes. Now, some of this stuff matters. I mean, I'm not trying to be a hypocrite. I've covered a lot of the stuff that Pope Francis has done that's very problematic. And it's like, you've got to point it out sometimes. But it becomes almost an obsession. And so what happens is, within that community itself, if you color outside the lines by accident because you're trying to figure something out, everybody pounces and they're like, oh, look, Skojec's really an apostate, and it's like, slow down. But you're trying to figure things out. And what it does is it creates a self-consciousness of, if I say this, what articles are going to get written about me? How many people are going to, to blow up, the comment box and distract from the conversation. And so you wind up self-censoring just out of a reflexive, like, I don't want to deal with this. I'm trying to figure something out. And in order to do that, I need to get a little bit messy here. So, in the context of this article you're talking about, being able to back up and look at things like papal infallibility and say, what does it really mean? What does indefectibility of the church really mean? Because we have a lot of stuff going on that kind of indicates that maybe we've got a problem with this understanding. And so these censors, self-appointed, are everywhere within this community. And so what I love about Peterson is that he doesn't have any of that. He doesn't have any fear of the Orthodox, police coming out and being like, you said in Sacrum, it says this. It's like, he just goes after it. And if he brings up evolutionary biology, well, nobody's going to give him crap for talking about evolution because they're a young earth creationist, which a lot of Catholics are. I didn't know that, but they are. Because he's an evolutionary psychiatrist. Of course, he's going to talk about that. You may not agree with him, but But you can set that aside because he's talking about motifs in Genesis and about how serpents are this primordial enemy of man. And so the imagery of the serpent in the garden, what that means. And he just has this way of unlocking the truth. And I had this experience subjectively listening to his biblical lecture series of I've never been inspired by a sermon in a church in my life the way that I was inspired by listening to this non-Catholic guy talking about the Bible. Yeah, and I sent it to a friend, and she came back to me and she said the exact same thing. She's like, holy cow, what is with this guy? Like that was exciting.
Well, it's like the title of your essay. He doesn't really rely on platitudes, and you hear that a lot in the Catholic. He's not a sentimental type of person.
No, no, I don't think so. Yeah.
No. The only way I could, when I was reading that part of your essay, the only way I could relate is that the only time I got any kind of like serious blowback is when, because I've been evangelized, but I've been writing for a long time, like 15 years. So, I mean, I got a lot of positive reaction from Catholics when I just write things like, oh, I'm the ex-gay guy that, lived a very, gnarly life. And now I'm back in the church and, everything's so beautiful in the Catholic Church and, all this stuff. But then when I started looking at the underlying problems in the church, specifically the bishops, that's when people didn't like me so much.
No, they don't like that at all. And there's this beaten dog ethos within Catholicism. I really think Catholicism has a masochistic strain in it. And I don't know if it's a distortion of our understanding of suffering being redemptive, going back to the thing that, every kid with an Irish Catholic mom heard his entire life growing up, anything went wrong, offered up, Like there's just this ethos of suffering is integrated. It's part of your life. If you want to go to heaven, you better just suffer and grin and bear it, right? So there's that, but it becomes like this. I don't know about you. It bothers me when I hear good, faithful people, people who are holier than me by a mile, which isn't hard, but who go to mass every day and they're saying the rosary every day and they're at confession at least twice a month. And then they're out there saying, well, if we get these bad bishops and we get these bad popes and bad priests, it's because we deserve it. We deserve that, and it's like, no, you don't. You don't deserve to have, the means of grace and of the sacraments and the men who are supposed to instruct you in the path of salvation to actually lead you away from that. How does a just and loving God reward you for your faithfulness by giving you evil bishops? Like that doesn't make any sense to me in any sense of Catholicism or Christianity.
It makes sense to me because I played those mind games. I was trying to deal with the pre-sex abuse because for most of my life I was thinking, well, I asked for it. I hung around the priest. Yeah. And I was needy, and that's why it happened to me. But sometimes
that's a really important point. It's an abuser's mentality that he inflicts on his victim.
Yeah.
You deserve this. I mean, look, this is something that came up the other day. We had this big discussion on Twitter because it's where all the big discussions happen. And there's this thing about people are leaving the church. They're leaving for orthodoxy. They're doing this, they're doing that. And I said something about how even though I can't agree that it's the right decision, I'm sympathetic to it. And I had this priest show up who was like, well, it doesn't matter what the church does. And it doesn't matter, what the scandals are. The church is the only means of salvation. And so these people just can't leave. And I'm like, it sounds like an abusive husband who says to his wife, well, you can't make it on your own. You're nothing without me. So you just have to put up with my abuse. There has to be more to the story than, welp, extra ecclesiam nulla salus. There's no salvation outside the church. So we get to keep punching you. There needs to be some moderated position there, because it's not okay to tell people you got hit because you deserved it. And they're just trying to be faithful.
Yeah. That's tough. I know.
I mean, I know I'm ranting a little bit. I apologize for that.
No. I agree with what you're saying.
But I mean, you as an abuse victim, you are an abuse victim, and you were convinced that it was somehow your fault. I mean, is that not the psychology of abuse victims everywhere?
Yeah. And there's kind of a bit of a cult mentality, I think, in Catholicism sometimes, that just you don't leave.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do leave, you get punished, and you get persecuted, and you can't leave. It's bizarre. It's bizarre.
It is bizarre.
The only time sorry, 1 second. The only time I've experienced it again, but not as severe, strangely enough, is when I left the gay community, because you just don't leave.
Right.
And if you do leave, for the most part, you're cut off from everything.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Which is, by the way, exactly what the Legionaries did to me.
Yeah, I always kind of think what separates a religion and a cult is how you are treated if you're talking about leaving and you leave.
Yeah.
Because I think a religion just be like, okay, like let's have a conversation about it. Let's talk about it. Let's deal with it.
Yeah, like if I believe
is like, it starts to get abusive right away.
Yes.
And that's
if I believe that the only sure path to salvation is Catholicism, which is what we believe, and you leave the church because you were abused by a priest and you're scandalized by the response of the bishops when you try to bring to their attention the stuff that's going on in the dioceses and all the things that anybody who follows you knows, you're becoming deeply cynical about the stuff that you're running into. Why is the church hurting Catholics more than anybody else is? And if that becomes so overwhelming to you that you can't be there anymore, but I'm convinced you need to be there for salvation, well, the last thing I'm going to do, Joseph, is browbeat the hell out of you about how you don't get to leave. It's going to be like, okay, what can we do? Let's keep talking. Let's keep being friends.
You're a minority. You're a minority, Steve. Steve, the survivors I've spoken to didn't get out of bed one Sunday morning and just go, you know what? I'm not going to mass today.
Right.
I mean, a lot of them just after the abuse or whatever left right away. But the ones that tried to stick around had really struggled a long time, like I am, and they just got beaten down. And it's
insulting to treat those people like they're dumb or like they just lack the self-awareness to realize what a big deal this is. I mean, there's a guy I know who left the church, who left the priesthood and then left the church.
Wow.
One of the smartest people I've ever met. No, he has forgotten more about Catholicism than I have ever known. There's no way I could tell him something he doesn't already know about the church. He's an expert in theology and in history and in all this stuff. Smarter guy than me, just would flat out beat me in an intellectual contest. But he can't say that he actually believes the church is what she claims to be because his own experiences led him to see it as the antithesis of what he thought he was doing when he became a priest. I don't know how to overcome those experiences. So the most I can do is keep being a friend to him. And we talk and we try to work it out when we can. And I'm not pushy, and you pray for people like that, but it's like, there needs to be a triumph of grace there. It's not going to be, because I'm just being super aggressive with you and I'm waging crusades against people who left.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we've got this problem where we have this effeminate, weak leadership in the church. And so a lot of men in particular, but women do it too, who are Catholics, see that and their reaction is to be like, well, we just need to be hardcore, man. We just got to beat up on everybody. We can't be wussies. We got to have spines. And it's just like, all right, but you're being a jerk. You got to stop being a jerk or nobody's going to want to do, what you're saying. No, you're actually turning people off and you think you're fulfilling some moral duty.
Yeah.
So that's why I think, what's really impressive about your apostolate, you don't go in and beat up on the people when you go, to the Folsom Street Fair or, wherever you're going. I mean, you just say, hey, God loves you and you don't have to keep doing this thing that's hurting you.
No, I'm just there and I'm present. So can I ask you about something? It came up.
It's actually your show. I'm taking over, but you get to ask me whatever you want.
No, you're not. No. One of the things, and it's I kind of feel like I'm being programmed. One of the things that I deal with Catholics sometimes is the church versus evil men in the church. They get and they just get into arguing. We can't say the church. It's not the church. This is not the church. Pope Francis is not the church. The USCCB is not the church. The bishops are not the church. This and this priest is not the church. This parish is not the church. What the hell is the church?
Yeah.
You know, it's like they're trying to program me. I don't, well, it is the church. This is all the church.
It's all absolutely part of the church. I mean, this is kind of the no true Scotsman fallacy, right?
They're trying to slice and dice everything.
Yeah.
It literally drives me crazy. I don't know what
I mean, you know, and I don't know. Have you ever pressed them on this? I mean, I don't know that I always do, and I probably should more.
I don't answer anybody.
Because the church is obviously more, you know, the church that you're talking about is, if we're going to, you know, put on our theological hats for a minute and be dispassionate about everything, it's the tip of the iceberg, right? The church militant on earth exists, the church suffering in purgatory, the church triumphant in heaven. There's this big body of the church. We only see the church militant, and then specifically when you're talking about this stuff, you're focusing on the institutions, the hierarchy, the offices, the bishops' conferences, the things like that, which don't even comprise the entirety of the church militant on earth. I mean, we're part of the church militant. The good priests are part of the church militant. The 5 good bishops that exist in the world are, you know, part of the church militant. So it's complicated, but they don't get to just create this false disambiguation where they're like, well, you know, that's not really the church. It's like, yes, it is. You know, the Pope is running the church. The bishops, there's thousands of them, and they're all on the same page. This is, so I refer to it as the institutional church because it's the structures. I don't know if that's the right phrase, but absolutely that's the church. It's just not the entirety of it. And so I don't think these people are really thinking it through.
Well, I think
they're rationalizing.
I think in the abuse crisis is a way to cover their, because it's kind of like, well, the church had nothing to do with your abuse. It was this particular priest.
Not again, it's
not
the
really
fallacy.
That's not really true.
It's a logical fallacy because you're saying, well, the real church wouldn't really do that. And it's like, well, no, this is part of the real church. And it really did do this. And the structures of power within the church covered it up. And, you know, you go down the line and you're like, yeah, this is all really part of the church. And they have to be able to deal with the fact that, you know, the spotless bride in some respects isn't. And I don't know if this is just a failure of catechesis and theology, or if it's an overestimation of, you know, of the status of the church and the papacy that comes out of, you know, the 19th century pietistic expressions of Catholicism that were very overwrought. You know, because a lot of people who are very devoted, that's what they do. They go back to those old books and they're very flowery about, you know, everything Catholic. And it's just like, okay, but that's not real life. If you look at history, that is not the church, you know? And so I don't know. It is problematic.
Okay. This is related though. You wrote, I must admit that I no longer even know how to evangelize with confidence because I don't know why, outside of a triumph of grace, anyone would want to become a Catholic today. This is an issue that I've dealt with, and I haven't really said it much publicly, but when I do outreach, you know, to the gay community down in San Francisco, mm-hmm. I do not recommend the Catholic Church anymore. I mean, that's, you know, that.
What do you? I mean, you have the experience of having tried to leave that community and go to a priest to get help, and what happened?
Yeah.
They encouraged you to keep going in your sin.
Yeah, even more than that. You get proposition. You get sexually assaulted.
So it's not like you can just say, go talk to a priest.
No.
You have to put qualifiers on.
Yeah, my situation is it's kind of local there, where San Francisco, it's really problematic, but it's kind of universal too. Yeah. I can't in good conscience tell somebody who identifies as LGBT, whatever, to go talk to a Catholic priest, because I think the majority of the time they're going to end up worse than before they walked into that parish. Mm-hmm. So that's just a fact. So
yeah, I mean, that is the unfortunate reality, is that it is the rare priest and the even rarer bishop who would do anything to actually help that person.
Yeah. And people go, well, courage, but courage is very clandestine. how do I give people the knock at the door that you
like
have
speakeasy,
to get admitted? It's completely bizarre. So I don't recommend the Catholic Church to anyone anymore.
And that when you're in that situation and you can't, it feels wrong. You're like, I know I should be able to do this because
I would like to.
I believe in it enough that I'm still part of it. I'm still, I'm still playing Pascal's wager. I'm seeing it through at least.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I need some confidence. Even if it weren't, the LGBT situation is particularly bad. And the reason you don't tell people to talk to priests is because you've spent a lot of time talking to priests and talking to bishops. You know the kind of answers they're going to get.
Yeah.
And, but it's the same thing. My wife is a convert, and she came into the church in part because of me and the things that I taught her. And then she went to Mass. And I had been very careful about go to this church and do this thing. And I kept the blinders on. And then she went to Mass somewhere without me. And she was like, what are they doing? What is going on? And she was devastated by what she saw because I wasn't there, spoon feeding her the best stuff that I could find. And this was before I was a traditional Catholic. Now it's even harder for me because I'm like, well, you need to go either to go to the Byzantines, the Melkites, or the TLM. Go to somebody who's got an old liturgy,
And the traddy world is complicated because I don't mean to make this out to be funny, but it's sort of amusing.
Let's make a joke at their expense. They need a better sense of humor about themselves.
I've sent people who are not your typical traddy person to a TLM Mass. Let's just say they're from the community that I know, and I've sent them there, and I didn't go with them for whatever reason, and they called me back. I was like, how was it? And they were like, well, it didn't go that well because they looked super unusual. They didn't pull up in a minivan and have 7 kids.
Yes.
So
it's becoming less so, but it tends to be a very homogenous situation.
Yeah.
People who go to those parishes are self-selecting, and they tend to follow a certain type. There are variations within the type, but it's still a type. So yeah, I could definitely see how that would be the case. You'd kind of have to go incognito if you were checking that out from another way of life.
I know. God bless them all. But that's why a lot of these people gravitate towards the gay parishes with the rainbow flag.
They feel comfortable.
And the gay tea times and all that stuff because they just feel like it's welcoming and this is where I belong and these people understand me and they don't judge me
and they're never going to challenge me to change my life for the better either. So
I know.
Then it just becomes therapeutic moral deism basically.
Yeah. This is really important. You wrote this because I put a big star here. Those of my generation have never seen a church not at war with herself, never known a church where there was not 2 competing sets of doctrines, 2 fundamentally incompatible liturgies in her central rite, 2 entirely different sets of sacraments, 2 completely disparate versions of a thing we're told is characterized by unity of all things as on its 4 distinguishing marks. Yeah, that's what we just talked about.
Yeah.
In San Francisco, for example, this is how stark it is. This is why it's difficult for me to evangelize there. There's one parish where I could send someone who's gay, and they would find a compassionate priest who gives them the time to listen to them and hear them, and will share the truth with them. They can literally walk over the hill because San Francisco's all hill. They can really literally walk over the hill, and the priest in the other parish will marry them to their same-sex partner. So that's not 2 different churches. They're not.
Yeah, it can't be this way. It can't, and the competition between the 2, the differences between the 2, they're so stark. Very few people can straddle the line. I grew up Novus Ordo. It's, kind of what I was saying earlier. And I didn't seriously consider traditionalism until after I was married. And it was actually my wife, the convert, who saw it first before I did, because we were there for a TLM that was starting after the mass we were at. And she saw it and she's like, this is the real deal. I can, like, just her face, you could just see that she saw something that I couldn't. But now, having, been there for 16 years, people don't switch back and forth very much. Like, if you start going to the TLM, you stop going to the Novus Ordo. It starts to be an irritant to you. And it's interesting because even Paul VI acknowledged in an address, I think it was in 1969 or 1970, that the new rite of Mass that they were implementing would annoy the faithful. I mean, I believe he actually used the word annoy, because it's not what they're used to. There's something antithetical about the two, or when you're getting your kids baptized and you see the difference between the rite of baptism that has, exorcisms built in, because your kids are coming into the world under original sin, under Satan's power. I mean, by the church's own teaching, original sin is enough on its own to preclude us from the beatific vision. So, you're under Satan's power coming into this world. Damn straight, I want my kids to have those exorcisms. I want every chance they're going to have to survive this life that we're going into. And, or here's another example. There's a priest I knew. He wasn't the official diocesan exorcist, but he'd been given power to deal with some situations that involved the demonic that had come up in his area by his bishop. And he told me this story about how he had gone to a, one of these, I don't know, it was a healing mass or what it was, but some woman had manifested a demon of some kind, and a priest who was there quickly blessed some water, the typical way you make, Novus Ordo holy water, whatever it is, and throws it on the woman, and this voice comes out of her, this awful guttural voice, and says, "Faithless priest, that's not holy water." Oh. And so this priest friend of mine, who I'd worked for at the time, also a Novus Ordo priest, never did the TLM or anything like that. But he's like, that day I went out and I found an old book of blessings, and now I do, the blessing of holy water with the salt and the exorcisms and all that stuff. And he's like, I'm not messing around. It's industrial strength holy water from here on out, man. I'm not playing that game.
You wrote, the church throws all her weight behind the inferior things. It's as if she wants us to lose our faith. Yeah.
And I was really on fire when I wrote this thing, wasn't I?
Totally. because with the gay issue, I have found that where I've gone to bishops, I've gone to priests with some ideas, not outlandish, and even taking it off their shoulders and saying, "Hey, Father, just provide a venue, and I'll take care of the rest." No, but at the same time, these guys are promoting the rainbow masses and wearing rainbow stole in their diocese.
I mean, here's a thought exercise for your
and pride and the contingents at the Pride Parade. They're that's okay.
Yeah, but here's a thought exercise for your audience. If you put on the mind of a villain, it's kind of like when you watch a murder mystery and you're like, what would I do if I was the killer? How do I solve, this problem? If you wanted to subvert the church, if you wanted to not be open and overt about your plans of undermining Catholicism and stopping people from attaining salvation, but you wanted to do it subtly enough that you could actually entangle a lot of souls who thought that they were going to the right places and doing the right things, how would your plan look different than the Catholic Church looks today? But what would you do to be more effective at using the church to pull souls away from God and towards damnation? Mm-hmm. I don't have any ideas on how much further it could be pushed. Do you?
No. They have,
and that's a terrifying thought. It is a terrifying thought to say, if I do everything that Pope Francis says I can do, if I receive communion while I'm in an adulterous relationship, if I declare that things, that religious indifferentism, like he does in the Abu Dhabi statement, if I say that, the death penalty is now immoral everywhere, even though the church always taught that it was morally licit and it's in the scriptures, these are sins. I mean, I can go to hell for doing the things the Pope is saying is okay. This is fun. I mean, two different religions. It is fundamentally incompatible. And I don't know what to do with that. And I don't think anybody does.
No, and they have.
And that's before we get to the stuff you're talking about with the gay stuff.
Yeah, they have the air of legitimacy too, because I know when I've gone to the LA rec, and I hand out leaflets, specifically the last couple of times that James Martin was speaking about the gay issue, and the leaflet was just, it wasn't a tract. It was just telling people what he said, and just to warn people and say, hey, if you go to this, be mindful that he's not really that in line with Catholic teaching. And people looked at me, understandably, with this bemused expression saying, well, you know, Archbishop Gomez is here, they always say Bishop Barron. Bishop Barron is here. How can anyone possibly be here that does not support Catholic teaching? And I don't know, how the hell do I answer them? I don't know. I really never had an answer.
Well, why are we in the position where we have to answer that question?
I don't know.
Because who are we? I mean, who are we? The church is not some grassroots organization. It's not a democracy. It's a monarchy, damn it. It's like power flows from God to the Pope and down through the bishops, and that's the way that things move. That's the way this rock rolls. And it's like, I'm actually speechless, because it's like there's only so many times you can go say the things that you're saying and be ignored. There's only so many times I can say the things I'm saying and be ignored. There comes a point where it's like, well, I don't have apostolic succession. You know, you got to do something about this. I can't.
No. You wrote, for if the church is what she claims to be and her doctrines are true, they can bear any scrutiny we throw at them. It's not for her sake, but for ours that we seek to understand how to make sense of what happens to be contradictory.
Yeah. Right. And so these things that we're talking about that we don't have answers for, they prompt some big questions. And people get nervous when you ask some of these questions. You know, people in the Orthodox camp, the small O Orthodox camp, they get worried when you start saying, I'm not so sure Vatican I really did the best job on infallibility. Like, you can't say that, you know. It's like, okay, but I'm saying it because look what's happening. Like, this is a problem. Yeah.
You wrote, though circumstances vary, we should strive to persuade more than to admonish, because many are finding their faith in a very fragile state right now, and they don't need an extra push towards the door. Thank you. That's kind of my conclusion to your essay. Thank you. Because a lot of people, unfortunately, I kind of feel like the church, I haven't left the church has just left me. I know it's kind of a cliche, but you posted something like that on Twitter the other day. And I just said, you know, Steve, the church doesn't want you and the church doesn't want me. I mean, how many times have I just...
No, they would love to be rid of people like us. They're not gonna, they'll say, don't let the door hit you on the way out. We annoy them.
Yeah.
We're asking them to be accountable. We're telling them, hey, you got to stop living this prodigal, profligate life. You can't do this anymore. And that's not what they want to hear. And so for me, and I'll kick it back to you, but I just want to say this about that conclusion. If you don't have compassion, I'm going to look into the camera, you know, if you don't have compassion for the people who are leaving the church right now for orthodoxy or for agnosticism or for whatever it is that they're leaving for, people who are faithful Catholics who have just thrown up their hands and they're like, I just can't believe this anymore. There's too much that's too irreconcilable. If you don't have compassion for those people because they're scandalized out of the church, even after our Lord said what the dangers of scandal were, then there's something wrong with you. You need to reevaluate yourself. You need to do a gut check and say, how do I deal with these people with compassion, with love, with charity? I'm not going to scold them for what they're doing. And this goes back to the argument I had with that priest. You can't just say, well, I hate you because you deserved it, and you have to take it because you'll never make it without me. We have to do better than that. That's all.
Yeah, I agree. I want to move to the McCarrick report. Do we have time? I mean, I
have time. So if you have time, I have time.
I've already taken enough, like an hour of your time.
That's because I talk too much. It's all right.
No, it's cool. but you have something to say. There's a difference between people that just talk a lot and don't have anything to say.
Well, in fairness, I have less to say about the McCarrick report, because at 400 and however many god-awful pages of nonsense, I decided I wanted to spend my week, doing more productive things than reading the excuse making and the blame shifting and all of that. So
I actually read it yesterday, and I wasn't gonna read it because I kind of felt like, number one, I don't want to be triggered. I hate that word, but it's the only one that works.
Yeah.
And then I kind of feel like I don't want to comment on it because I kind of feel like I don't have anything to do with the McCarrick case. I've never met him, nothing about it.
Sure.
And I kind of feel like I didn't want to comment on it. I kind of thought, well, that I see a lot of like Catholic talking heads comment on it. And I thought, okay, as somebody with some experience as a survivor, I'll comment on it.
And I think that's important. I'm glad you're doing it.
Oh, I did. One of the things that really pissed me off right away, it was actually before I even read it, was I saw a comment that Wilton Gregory had made. And he wrote, "Nonetheless, we know that if true redemptive healing is to ever commence for those who have been harmed and for the church herself, this disclosure must be made." And I kind of thought, what an arrogant asshole. What an arrogant a-hole. Because who is he to say when people can begin to heal? That is not for him to say, oh, this McCarrick report has been issued. Now healing can begin. Let healing commence.
So
what an arrogant jerk.
No more platitudes. That's a platitude. And he's one of the most repugnant members of the church hierarchy, in my opinion. I find him detestable.
In Atlanta, when he was Archbishop, he had a priest. There's a priest there, and I don't really like to comment on people's personal lives, but he's very pro-gay.
Yeah,
very pro-gay, very out there, very out and about, and on that issue. And he was one of the go-to priests that Archbishop Gregory would send pre-sex abuse survivors to.
No, you can't.
Now, most pre-sex abuse survivors are male.
Yeah.
So it's already difficult. Most of these cases, most of these instances of abuse, I would say, were never reported. I never reported my case.
Yeah, I mean, it seems likely. And what is the reason? Is it because of personal embarrassment? Is it because?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with shame. Men don't want to report any kind of abuse, especially male on male abuse.
Right. And I mean, don't they use? I mean, I don't want to get too much information, but I mean, they weaponize pleasure, don't they? So that you feel guilty that you felt good. That they did something that made you feel good.
Yeah. One of the things that super triggered me in the McCarrick report, and it's the beginning of the report, or I should have said the beginning, but like the first, at least like quarter, is a lot. And I hadn't read anything about the case. So I don't know if this stuff is public already, but there were several priests and seminarians who had been sexually assaulted, groomed by McCarrick. And one of the things that McCarrick had said to one of his victims was, "Someday I will lay hands on you when I ordain you." And this is when he was molesting him sexually. And I have to say that in Catholicism, what I've noticed, and in my own case of abuse, is the abusers often mix religion and sexuality.
Yeah, I've read that in other cases as well.
And what people don't get is this is still openly going on in the Catholic Church in kind of a more insidious way. And people can disagree with me, but with this "God made you gay" rhetoric, I think it's the same. It's the same thing. It's mixing religion and sexuality in a way, especially when you're targeting that message to minors. to young people, it sets up people for abuse. It's a very subtle way of grooming. And, you know, here McCarrick was doing it privately, I guess you could say, between him and his victim. And now it's done sort of globally. Am I crazy? But that's what I believe.
No, I don't think you're crazy at all. I mean, it is, I think it's actually a pretty interesting observation, you know, not having given it a lot of thought yet, but I can absolutely see the parallels there.
There was also the priests are named like priest 1, 2, 3, 4 in the McCarrick report. And this was priest 4. This really sort of shocked me. Not much shocks me, because this is part of my story that I haven't really talked about. Priest 4 had been a victim of McCarrick. Priest 4 talks to another priest who's named here, and then priest 4 with this other priest is taken to a priest counselor. That priest counselor sexually assaults the priest victim.
What the hell?
Okay, and when I read that, I was like, what the hell? Yeah, but that actually happened to me, because as an abuse survivor, actually at one point in my life, and I was an adult like this priest, I went to another priest for help. He knew I was a survivor, but he initiated, you know, a grooming process and then propositioned me. So I don't think it's unusual, because victims are often, and people think this is because they want to be re-victimized, but a lot of times victims are re-victimized.
What is your take on why that kind of thing happens? I mean, because I know my reaction and the reaction of a lot of people when they first read that McCarrick was abusing adult seminarians, you know, was, well, why the hell didn't you just punch the guy? Like, he's this little old, you know, Emperor Palpatine looking dude, you know, he's just this wizened old, you know, guy who's like 5 foot nothing. Like, why don't you just deck him?
Okay.
And so that's something a lot of people don't get.
Okay. That's because I had this conversation with Father Nix too. And there was an interesting, I read it. I didn't read it like a phone with a fine-tuned comb, the report, but I read it pretty thoroughly. And one of the psychologists in there that had talked with one of McCarrick's victims noticed the victim's personality traits, which were quite shy and I don't know if you would say repressed, but he was not at all a type A personality.
Sure.
He was a naive guy. And predators aren't going to go after somebody like you, Dave.
Right.
Steve. You know, they're not going to go after somebody like Father Nick.
Yeah.
They know who to zero in on, and it's the vulnerable, and they know the ones that they can get away with. I mean, I was one of them too.
I mean, it's crazy. I've come to a better understanding of this since, you know, I originally reported on this a year or two ago. Partially because, you know, it's almost preternatural the way that they have this ability to pick out their victims. You know, so for example, you know, you and I have talked on the last show that we did about the Legionaries about how I was looking for a lot of paternal affirmation and things like that. And in that sense, I was vulnerable. I wanted the approval of these priests. And, you know, so if somebody had been a predator amongst that group, maybe they would have tried to exploit it, but maybe not, because my personality type was like, maybe I would have been the guy who would have punched them, you know? But I also know, there's a priest by the name of Father Donald McGuire. He was a Jesuit, and he died in prison for his crimes, but he was the spiritual director to one of my best friends and his whole family. And there's 9 boys in the family. And these are the kind of boys who, you know, you don't mess with these guys. Like, they will take your body out to the desert and it'll never get found again if you do something like that. But this priest was simultaneously taking advantage of other guys who had, you know, no fathers or who, you know, whatever. He found the vulnerable ones. And the crazy thing, and the thing that a lot of people, I think, really struggle to understand is my friend, and actually I have 2 friends who were spiritual directees of this guy. He made a positive difference in their spiritual life. He gave them good advice. You know, my friend would constantly bring up, oh, Father McGuire said this, Father McGuire said that. You know, whatever the situation was, he had some advice that was applicable to that situation. The other guy had been he was a jerk. He got a girl pregnant. He was running around just, not living a good life. And Father McGuire actually turned him around, set him on the right path. He's now the very Catholic father of a large family and taught religion for a long time as a DRE and all this stuff. These are guys who were positively influenced by a man who died in prison for being a sexual predator. And it's this weird, the grooming process is complicated. And I don't fully understand it yet, but I think it really is very psychologically selective.
Yeah. And you're brainwashed too.
Yeah.
And these situations are described in the report too, where a seminarian or a priest was in bed, and then McCarrick got into bed with them, and they essentially froze. And I get that too, because when you're with somebody, especially it's a religious figure, and you trust them, and something like that happens, it just it shocks you, and you really don't know what to do, and you just kind of go into survival mode. You just kind of let this be over, and then when I'm away from this person, I don't want to be there near them.
It seems to me like the building of trust and the construction of sort of a network of allies around the victim are really important. I mean, you see this in cases, it comes up again and again where, especially, pre 2002, when the abuse happened back then, some kid, 11 years old, whatever, goes to his mom and he says, Father so-and-so did this to me. And she's like, don't ever speak about a priest that way, because the priest already has her trust. And then he's exploiting the respect traditionally held for the priesthood, which was very strong, in 1950s and 60s Catholicism, where the parents of these kids would have come out of. I mean, and there's a lot of pietistic stuff out there about, never speak ill of a priest because Saint so-and-so says this. And it's like, so there's this insularity of like, I don't want to hear you say that. You're making that up. Don't ever say a priest would do that. And so now the kid can't even go to his parents. And I don't know the right way. We talk to our kids about this stuff and we're like, guess what? We're never going to say that to you. We're never going to tell you we don't believe you. No matter how crazy it is, come talk to us about it. Because the priest is probably going to tell you can't say anything, or the teacher or whoever. They're going to tell you, this is our secret, or they're going to do something to make you feel ashamed. You have to come to us anyway. But I don't know how you deprogram that.
This same mentality persists in the church, but in a different form. Like when Bishop Barron sat down with Dave Rubin, and Dave asked him about Obergefell, and Barron gave this very stupid response about how I'm not going to get on a Crusaders tank and try to overturn Obergefell. So I reported on. I think that interview kind of went over a lot of Catholic people's heads. So like the next day or the following day, I did a little report on it, and people absolutely went nuts. That how dare I? And this is before anybody was really saying anything about Bishop Barron. And people went absolutely nuts. And I said, this is the same mentality that perpetuated the pre-sex abuse scandal, because there are just certain priests and certain people and certain bishops you don't talk about.
Yeah. No.
Nice.
Clericalism has changed its guise, but it's alive and well.
Is it clericalism, or is it like a cult of personality? That's just.
I mean, I think it can be both. In somebody like Barron's case, it's probably a cult of personality, but I do think there's still a lot of that. I see things like, as Catholics, we're obligated to give the benefit of the doubt to this person, and we need to try to interpret what they said in the most orthodox and positive light. And in a way, it's like a kind of gaslighting. It's like, no, I know what he said. Like, it's very obvious what he said. You have to twist yourself in knots to interpret it a different way. But people just are like, well, I don't want to hear anything about this, or he did so much good for me. So, I don't know. It's a weird thing, but I think that, I don't know. I don't think clericalism's gone. It's certainly not when you look at the cronyism that happens at the higher echelons of the church and the Vatican, and the Pope protecting his bishop friends and his cardinal friends, or Father Anzoli. There's a number of people he either protected directly or worked with. I mean, Francis called the people of Osorno, Chile, stupid for believing the allegations against Bishop Barros. Said it publicly.
No, I know.
And it's like that, man, that's some crazy stuff. to just insult the people who are like, we don't want this guy. He's a monster.
But clericalism doesn't just involve clerics, and involves the laity, because the laity.
I think the laity engage in clericalism a lot.
They're the worst. They're the absolute worst.
They deify, anybody who's got a Roman collar.
Yeah. Now, one of the priests, this is from the McCarrick report, one of those number of priests wrote, I spoke up at the time, and I think that if I had been listened to, things might have been different. I have what I believe to be justifiable anger and frustration, because what happened to me makes it difficult for me to trust bishops. And I know that many other priests feel the same way. I got to tell you that since I've been kind of open and honest about my struggle with the church, I've had a lot of priests talk to me, and I would say morale is zero among priests. It's absolutely horrible. There's things that they can't talk about, and bishops dangle over their head their vocation.
Mm-hmm.
They'll take away their assignments. They'll laicize them.
Yep. Yeah, I know of priests in these situations, and they have no power. They're compelled by obedience to follow the commands of bishops that don't necessarily, order them to sin, but they order them to do things that are not in their own best interest or in the best interest of their congregations.
But you mentioned gaslighting. It makes me worry about the priesthood, because one of the things I struggled with when I was reading the McCarrick report was that I was reading these testimonies of these priests and seminarians, and I was like, oh my God, they were abused. They were taken to a counselor who abused them. They went to their bishops. The bishops did nothing. Why the hell stay? Is the priesthood that valuable to them, where they would put up with this? And it makes me worry that they are being, like, it's almost like a form of brainwashing.
Yeah.
I got to think back to my own experiences, and it's the insidious nature of abuse, where you're in a trap, and you can't get out of it.
Well, that comment that you just read actually disturbed me from that priest. He's struggling with whether or not he's allowed to be angry about this. Listen to the way he said it. Read it again. What did he say?
He said, I have what I believe to be justifiable anger and frustration, because
what I believe to be. He's not sure he's allowed to be angry at what was done to him. He's saying that it's, damaging him because he's not sure he could trust bishops. It's like, no, you can't. You must not trust them. You need to stick up for yourself,
he
man.
said, what happened to me makes it difficult for me to trust bishops.
The Stockholm Syndrome is baked into this whole thing. These priests are in a rough spot. They are in a rough spot, especially the ones who truly believe they had a calling from God. They don't know what to do. They're in this situation where it's like, well, if I want to be a priest, I got to put up with this stuff. A lot of them go through seminary knowing there's a lot of gay stuff going on in the seminary, and they're just trying to, put their pillow over their head and not notice it at night when they're trying to go to sleep.
Yeah.
And they learn to survive by keeping their heads down. And then they go out into the world and they have a little bit more freedom, in a parish, but they're still under the bishop's thumb. If they do anything he doesn't like, particularly if they do anything orthodox, they're likely to get canned. And they've now cultivated this survival instinct of, well, if there's any problems, I'm not going to look, and it's like, and then people are like, well, why don't you stand up for us? You're our pastor. Because he's been taught that the only incentive, the only way to get through being a priest is to be a coward and to hide.
They've been, Steve, they've been psychologically abused too.
Yes, 100%.
Not all priests have been, like these priests in the McCarrick report have been sexually assaulted. But I remember, my life in the Catholic Church has been insane. But there was a priest that was very good to me, and to make a long story short, he was actually not permitted to live in the rectory.
Mm-hmm.
Because the pastor there was carrying on a relationship with another man.
Mm.
So I was at the rectory one day with Father, the priest who was helping me out, and the pastor upstairs was having a knockdown, drag-out fight with his gay lover that went kind of spilled out into the sidewalk. And I'm just kind of like, Father, what the hell? You know, but, and this priest, and I loved him dearly. And I got frustrated with him a lot of times because I couldn't understand why he did what he did. And I mean, why, not what he did, but why he put up with what he did. It's just because he had been just psychologically tortured by the bishop, just constantly having his vocation, you know, ripped out from under him, at least the threat of it happening. And I didn't know all this was going on. And oh, dear Lord.
Yeah. And look, so, I mean, you know, to borrow again from my experience with the legionaries, I realized that the legionaries were systemically corrupt before I realized that Maciel was guilty of the things that he was guilty of. Now, I was aware at some point in that same process that he had been accused of some things, but I wasn't necessarily convinced that he'd done them, you know, and this stuff started coming out in the late 90s. It wasn't 2002 where we knew that this was a systemic problem. It was still very novel to hear that a priest had abused people, and you're like, really? Did he really do that? But I saw the manipulation and the lying and the treating, you know, people in a utilitarian fashion all the time, and the covering up of anything that could be perceived as scandal, and the aversion to any sort of criticism, and all of that, and how it was hurting people. And what I was seeing that I didn't know at the time was a culture that was created to protect a predator. He was a super predator, and he had an organization that he had built around him, and he had inculcated in them sort of a pedagogy of deceit and protection. And the priests down the line, who were often very good men who came into the order because they really just wanted to love God and be priests, were still brainwashed by a lot of the same bad stuff that he had put in place to protect his own malfeasance. And I do wonder, allegorically, if this is what you're seeing in the larger church. Is there such a gay, it's not even a gay subculture, it's like a gay superculture. And so it's so prevalent that they have created these networks and all this stuff, and the good priests are caught in between, you know, this way of dealing with things so that they can keep covering up the stuff that they're doing. And so, yeah, of course they're going to get abused, and they're going to get marginalized and threatened.
It's not even a gay subculture. It's a really sick gay subculture, because I mean, I was in the gay community and I didn't see shit, I didn't see sick shit as this bad as I've seen in the church.
Right.
It's worse. It's totally worse.
That's terrifying.
Excuse my language.
You're not bothering me.
No,
it is sick shit.
Because at least in the gay community, they don't mix it with religion.
I mean, seriously, the sacrilege aspect of this is grotesque. And you know, you see that when I remember looking at some of the PA grand jury report, and the use of sacramentals and sacred objects in some of the abuse, or the use of religious imagery. You know, it was disturbing. I mean, it's demonic. I think it really has to be.
One of the takeaways I wrote this, I thought of the McCarrick report, is the issue of bishop on priest predation, but also there's another issue that I've become aware of just because of my conversations with priests, and that's priest on priest predation, and priest and priest consensual sexual relationships, which people would be surprised is much more common than they think.
Which is crazy, because people think it's pretty common at this point, I think.
Really? Do they?
Well,
I never hear anything about it. I mean, I don't hear Catholic authors or Catholic commentators talk about.
I see a lot of discussion sort of in the trenches. You know, I'm weird because I spend a lot of time talking to the people who comment and tweet at me and all this stuff, you know, because I don't know. I'm bad at doing the whole, I'm an important Catholic figure and I'm not going to talk to you thing that people like to do. As I always joke, you know, I'm still Jenny from the block. I started out in the comm boxes. Okay. So, but anyway, that was a stupid reference to a pop song that I was hoping you were going to.
J-Lo.
Yeah. Okay. You got it. I thought you would. All right. So moving on from that ridiculousness. No, but I see it a lot where they assume there is so much more gay stuff going on than we see on the surface. And they assume that it motivates a lot of the bad stuff that's happening. So I think the average guy who is awake, who's red-pilled about the crisis in the church, who, you know, is raising a decent family and trying to get to the best mass he can and all that stuff, and is reading Catholic news.
Steve, those are lay Catholics. I have not seen priests come forward and describe the problem of priest-on-priest predation or consensual priest and priest relationships. That I haven't seen.
Yeah, no, but I mean, because it's suicide.
Yeah.
They're either going to leave the priesthood and talk about it after, or they're going to not talk about it so that they get to keep their jobs. And I know that, you know, I mean, take it away from the gay issue. If it's just, I want to offer the Latin Mass and the bishop doesn't want me to, or I want to do, you know, I want to criticize something the Pope said, but I know I'm going to get in trouble. There are a lot of priests who will eat a lot of crap sandwiches because they believe they have to be there to take care of their flock, whom they truly love with a Christ-like love, because they know that if they get yanked because they were a little too forward about something that they wanted to say or do, then the priest who's going to replace them is going to be a bad guy, most likely, because statistically that's just who's there. And they care about the people, and they're like, I could do more good staying here and kind of keeping my head down in the bunker than I can if I go. And if I go, then my people are on their own. My sheep will not be fed. And so it really is a terrible position to be in, I think.
It is. I'm looking.
By the way, can I ask you about?
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you. I didn't know how many more questions you had about this report, but I mean,
I'm going to try to wind it down
because you went through this whole thing.
I did.
Do you feel like there was any? I mean, because I'm not seeing any indication in the analysis I'm reading, any accountability here, really. I mean, did they just shift the blame to dead people?
Well, I don't know. I look at everything as a historical document. As a document, I mean, I don't know if it was originally written in, I think it was, a lot of it was English and then went to Italian and then went back to English. It was very well translated, I have to say. It was really easy to read. And as like a historical document, I thought it was very good because it detailed the history of McCarrick, especially his ecclesiastical career. And I was disappointed that other victims were not mentioned, but I mean, the very early priest victims, seminarian victims, I thought it did a good job of cataloging all of the evidence.
Yeah.
No, it makes no resolution at all. It spends way too much time going after Archbishop Vigano.
Yeah.
Which I want to talk about really quick. The last quarter is all about Vigano.
Which is, I mean, look, he accused Pope Francis, Cardinal Parolin, Cardinal Secretary of State. The Secretariat of State prepared this investigation. So the guy he accused is in charge of this investigation. Very nice, you know, to be able to do your own investigation of your own bad acts. And then Becciu, who was just fired from his position as Sostituto at the Secretariat of State, but was there, I'm sure, while they were preparing this report. And the guy is basically mafia. He has his hands in everything that goes on. So you have Vigano accusing these guys in 2018 of being knowledgeable about McCarrick and actively engaged in covering it up. And those are the people that produce this report. What do you expect you're going to get? They're not going to be like, we did it, you got us. Like, you know, it's not going to happen.
No, there's no accountability. What I thought the McCarrick report tried to do with Vigano, I thought their argument was that, well, the whistleblower always gets attacked.
Sure.
What they tried to say is that Vigano knew pretty much everything about McCarrick, but allowed him to continue doing what he was doing. But I mean, Vigano wrote that 2018 letter, so he did do something. He's not perfect.
No.
Vigano.
Nope.
But at least he's open and honest. I think he was in that first letter in 2018. You know, he participated to a degree, and he was complicit in this cover-up. But I mean, that was the kind of the thing that I thought that endeared me to him in that 2018 letter, is you could see he was a man tortured and struggling to have to reveal all this. And I don't think he came out looking that great either, but at least he revealed it. What did Pope Francis do? He's done nothing.
I think he said when he originally did that 2018 thing that he kept expecting that the information that he had given would be acted upon, and it wasn't. And he didn't feel like it was his place to just, get on a soapbox and grab a bullhorn and be like, McCarrick, is this. But, immediately when Pope Francis asked him about it in 2013, he's like, look, he has, done this to generations of seminarians. And by the way, he did issue a brief reply. He hasn't gone through the whole report and issued a full reply yet, at least not that I've seen. No. But he did say, and he is angry. He is an angry guy about this. He says, however, I cannot fail to note the surreal operation of mystification regarding who are the ones responsible for covering up the scandals of the deposed American cardinal. And at the same time, I cannot help expressing my indignation in seeing the same accusations of cover-up being made against me when in fact I repeatedly denounced the inaction of the Holy See in the face of the gravity of the accusations concerning McCarrick's conduct. An unprejudiced commentator would note the more than suspicious timing of the report's publication. He's talking about, I'm sure, that it comes out in the middle of the most contested election in American history, which is a very bright PR move, in my opinion. As well as the attempt to throw discredit upon me, accused of disobedience and negligence by those who have every interest in delegitimizing the one who brought to light an unparalleled network of corruption and immorality. The effrontery and fraudulent character shown on this occasion would seem to require at this point that we call this suggestive reconstruction of facts the Vigano report, sparing the reader the unpleasant surprise of seeing reality adulterated once again. But this would have required intellectual honesty even before love for justice and the truth. So he goes on to say, I'm not afraid of being blackmailed. Unlike everybody who's around this Pope, you can't blackmail me. If you want to bring, unfounded accusations, it's not going to work because you're not going to distract the public opinion away from the actual corruption and bad faith that's going on. So he says he's going to issue a more full response when he's done reading it, but he was pissed.
I also don't believe the thing in the report that people selectively knew and didn't know. I mean, because
wait, what does that mean?
Well, some people knew and some people didn't know. I mean, Cardinal O'Connor. There's a letter from Cardinal O'Connor.
Yeah.
I mean, he certainly heard rumors.
Right.
Cardinal Farrell certainly heard rumors.
Yeah.
Even Tobin from Newark admitted he had certainly heard rumors. And then there was somebody like Cardinal Wuerl who said he didn't know. Yeah,
Wuerl's already been proven to be a liar on this. I mean, he's been all over the map, and I'd have to go back and look it up from back in 2018. But he was found. There were contradictory testimonies of, oh no, we absolutely told Wuerl, and then he was like, I didn't know, and he's playing CYA. And you could talk to Rod Dreher, I mean, who was covering this when it came out, and one of the things that drove him out of the church was seeing how many people knew about this and refused to do anything about it. And he's been accused of being complicit himself. I've seen that happen because he didn't report the story. And he's like, I didn't have anybody who would go on the record. I can't just publish unsubstantiated rumors. I needed somebody who would go on the record, and nobody would. So he sat on that story for over a decade before it came out, and it's just like, or no, it wasn't. Yeah, it was over a decade. And it was just scandalous to him that nobody who knew about this was willing to dish. They'd talk about him, off the record on background privately, but that's it.
One of the things that annoyed me too was George Weigel, who I don't.
Oh my gosh!
He wrote, everyone did not know, and those who continue to insist otherwise are either ignorant or agenda driven. And I responded, everyone who should have known knew.
George Weigel has one job, Joseph, and that job is creating a cottage industry for himself around knowing Pope John Paul II.
Oh dear.
Everything he does, he mentions, did you know, by the way, that I was friends with John Paul II? Did you know I had dinner with John Paul II? Did you know, blah, blah, blah. And then he's like, and by the way, buy my book. And that's all he does. And so because John Paul II does not come out of this thing looking good, because he totally, bought McCarrick's lies and overrode the counsel that he was given not to trust him, he's ultimately the first one responsible for this. He put him in Washington. He gave him that job, and he shouldn't have, just like he shouldn't have trusted Maciel. He had incredibly bad judgment. And Weigel doesn't like hearing that, so he plays the bloviator game.
The thing about people not knowing is every time I've gone into a chancery with an issue with a problematic priest or a problematic parish, everybody's already, from the receptionist,
that stuff gets around.
From the receptionist to the bishop, everybody already knows that there's a problem there. So I don't buy that. And I was in a religious community for a while. I worked for a religious community, and let me tell you, they talk. Everybody knew everything that was going on in the diocese.
I believe it.
People that I had never heard of. There was so much gossip. It's not funny. So
I believe it.
I don't buy it. I don't buy it.
No, I don't.
And one of the things about the McCarrick report, I still don't understand what Pope Francis knew.
He's denied that Vigano told him what he told him.
Yeah, he did.
And so, I don't know what you do, because here you have a subordinate who goes to a superior because he's called into an audience and he's asked a direct question. So he didn't go there, report in hand. He was asked a direct question and he answered it verbally. There's no evidence of that. But what is he supposed to do? Maybe he should have left the meeting and written it down and put it in an envelope in a safe deposit box with a date stamp on it. I don't know how do you. I had this conversation with the Pope yesterday. He probably thought he could trust him. I don't know.
But I tend to believe Archbishop Vigano, but I also just think through the clerical grapevine or whatever that Francis already knew this stuff.
Well, I think it's likely. And McCarrick, remember, was involved. If you read The Dictator Pope and you read about the St. Gallen Mafia and stuff, they co-opted McCarrick into campaigning on Francis's behalf when it came time to vote for him in the conclave. That's one of the things that was in that book, is that McCarrick and McCarrick did a public speech. I think it was at Fordham or something like that. There are definite indications that McCarrick was in the bag for Francis going into the conclave. And Francis is notoriously loyal to those who help him attain power. This is why a lot of these guys who are manifestly corrupt, like Maradiaga, never wind up getting disciplined. Because,
Could there be maybe not an excuse, but an explanation for the Maciel situation? Because I think it's related with Pope John Paul, because maybe John Paul was ill at that time. What do you think?
I don't know. So my involvement with the Legionaries was in the mid 90s. So I think it would have started for me around 92 or 93. And then I parted ways with them in January of 1996, I believe. No, 1997.
Do you think John Paul was too diminished? He had a too diminished capacity?
Well, because I don't remember him being that sick at that time, and that's why I'm bringing up the time frame. I don't think he was that sick, but they wore his approval like a badge of honor all the time. They used it to deflect criticism all the time, because everyone loved John Paul II, and so John Paul II loved Maciel and the Regnum Christi and the Legionaries, and so they would use that to get Catholics who were on their case to back off. Like, well, John Paul II loves us, and it's like, and they could point to it, and they had little cards made up with the quotes from John Paul II about the order, and they were very good at using that to deflect criticism. So I don't buy that now. When did John Paul II get really sick with Parkinson? He died in
was it around 2000? 99, 2000?
Probably. I think that was when it probably really started to show. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay. See, I try to wrap this up. See, this goes in a really dark direction. I can follow that. I can go that way with Francis, because I don't have any particular affinity towards him.
Sure.
I can see how I don't know, even that's just is really disgusting to me, that he would knowingly promote.
Yeah, I'm not claiming that he knowingly
a pedophile.
I don't think he knowingly did it. I don't attribute malice to him in anything. I don't see that in him. I think he made a lot of
Francis.
big errors. No, John Paul II. I think I think Francis acted in malice. I think John Paul II acted
well, let me hear real quick
differently.
I have a difficult problem with it with John Paul. I mean, I quoted John Paul in my book.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of things about his early life in Poland during the war and the things he wrote that are just beautiful. And I have a difficult time thinking that he would actually tolerate a serial pedophile.
I think that he had a problematic judgment of character. He had his own biases. I mean, this is something I know came out in the McCarrick report about how in communist Poland they would use accusations of sex abuse to try to bring down good priests. So he had that in the back. I don't know. I don't know what. I don't think he acted maliciously. I think that he really just failed to exercise good judgment, and that's what happened. So on his count, it's hard to say, to exactly blame him, but there's that feeling I have of, man, you should have done better. You should have known better. You should have listened when people said this stuff to you and taken it seriously, because he was being told by people like Cardinal O'Connor, who was hardly, a communist agent in Poland. He should have listened, and he just didn't. I think he kind of just did whatever he felt like he wanted to do, and that was that. And it's unfortunate.
And if Pope John Paul is liable, and then Benedict is doubly liable, Francis would be triple liable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Benedict comes out of this looking like roses. A lot of people want to make him like the best looking of the three, but if you know enough that you're imposing restrictions and you're not putting any teeth on those, that's your problem, man. Like, don't give your kid a curfew and then be like, whatever, you can come home at 3. I don't really care. Like, you gotta enforce your own rules. And the fact that those sanctions were not distributed, that people didn't know, I mean, that was a big failure on Benedict's part, in my opinion.
A line that came up in the report a lot, and I did I did a search of it, is for the good of the church. And that came up it was kind of eerie. The different bishops had said it and different people said that. And I kind of wonder if that was the motivation behind a lot of this. I think they understood that people had been abused and these people were abusers, but for the good of the church.
Yeah.
It's better.
I mean, that was the traditional approach to this. That was the way we're going to bury the scandal for the good of the church. We're not going to make this stuff publicly known for the good of the church. Or the thing that came out, I haven't read the report, so I'm not going to talk out of turn, but I know there was a psychologist mentioned, who said basically something along the lines of, we don't air the church's dirty laundry in public. This idea of we have to protect the brand, so to speak, very prevalent in the traditional way of approaching this stuff. And it's problematic.
But like I've talked with families who have dysfunctional problems, if you bury it and you don't talk about it, it's going to come back 10 times worse. And we're living through it.
Exactly.
So I always
the utility of McCarrick, by the way, to Francis,
I don't know,
were his connections and his ability to bring in money. That guy could make it rain cash. He was extremely good as a fundraiser.
And I don't think
and have any demonstrable facts about McCarrick, and you want to send him to China to go start working on your crappy deal to sell out the Chinese Catholics, or you want to have him bring in money here or there, you want him to influence the papal, conclave, he's a good guy to go to for that stuff. So that's the utility of McCarrick. That's how he kept himself useful enough that the corrupt members of the hierarchy weren't going to sell him down the road. And he probably had dirt on everybody else too, because that's how that game gets played too.
And I hope Catholics don't think this is a one-off and it's over. I think in a lot of ways, McCarrick was a convenient fall guy. He was already retired. He's quite old. I mean, he's old as dirt. So I think he was convenient.
Sacrificial lamb.
You don't think this is going on with the younger? members of the hierarchy?
Look, I mean, if you go through the accusations against the guys that Francis is appointing to a number of positions, whether it's Peña, it's the guy who that runs the papal household, Monsignor Battista Rica, the Cardinal Coppocomario, who was allegedly at this drug-fueled gay orgy at Father Luigi Capazzi's place. Like, there's just over and over and over again, you see that in this circle of guys around him, yes, there are deeply compromised men. And Vigano says that he surrounds himself by these guys because they're blackmailable. And I've actually believed that for years before Vigano said that, because if you have compromised men around you and you look at them and you say, listen, you can keep doing whatever you do, and now you can use access and power and wealth that we have to pursue your little proclivities, whatever they are, but you have to be loyal to me. And if you screw me, you're done, because I know everything that you've done, and I've got a folder right here with all that information.
Yeah. Well, one of the things too, I'm trying to end it, but one of the things too that came out with the McCarrick report is that I remember specifically with Tobin in New York, he said, well, I looked into the rumors and it didn't involve minors.
Yeah, so like that's all that matters.
And it's kind of like for years, everyone in the church was willing to tolerate this because it looked like it had only involved adults, seminarians, and priests. Now, what actually sunk McCarrick, which was the turning point, is when the survivors came forward who were minors at the time.
Yeah,
and that turned it, and it turned it on a dime. But everything else before that, it didn't involve minors.
And the idea, I mean, this is a bishop, who has spiritual power, who has vocational power over these men. These men want to be ordained as priests, and they're being very careful around him because they know that he can reject them. There is a coercive power in that I can't believe was, incomprehensible to people.
But Steve, that's still the litmus test in the church, because I've talked with bishops about situations in parishes where, to me, it looks like predation, but it's involving all adults, and they won't do anything about it.
I don't have anything.
I know, and I know these are not minors involved, but these are still vulnerable adults.
Yes, they're vulnerable people, and oftentimes they're people who have a past history of abuse. They are subject to having been groomed. They may have, as you've indicated, been abused by priests before.
46% of gay men experience same-sex molestation as children. So they are a uniquely vulnerable population, and the church has not protected them. Like in Atlanta with Gregory. Well, he sends them to a gay priest. And then a lot of times these people who, I know this is a niche problem, but a lot of times these people are sent to these gay parishes with these gay priests. That's not a problem waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Or happening.
Man, it is so depressing. I mean, I don't want to end it on that note, but it's like the end is not in sight here. This is not over.
No, I talked to a bishop. I said, this is the next phase of the abuse scandal. I says, there are a lot of adults who are being preyed upon.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is why, even though it got exploited, the Me Too movement is kind of important. When you have these adult actresses, not adult actresses, but actresses who are adults, who are coming out and saying, this producer, this director, whatever, said, if I don't sleep with him, then there goes my career. Or, I mean, that's what these bishops are doing to these priests. If you don't let me do this, there goes your ecclesiastical career. There goes your vocation. I'm going to suspend you. I'm going to do whatever. And there's only going to be a certain number of those who are going to go along with it anyway, but there are going to be enough. And that needs to be understood as a coercive and abusive situation. Just because they're adults doesn't change it.
And again, predators know how to, because I've read the stories of some of these women who, like Harvey Weinstein, who were abused by them, and a lot of them came from difficult backgrounds.
Right.
So they were susceptible to abuse, and that's happening in the church today, right now. And the bishops don't care, because I think in their very short-sightedness, they don't see it as a financial liability. But one day, believe me, it will be.
Yes, it will. And
no, pay attention.
Not even necessarily directly through lawsuits and things like that, but people like me aren't going to give you any more money. You're done. You just don't get it from me. I'm out. Like, fix it, or we're not doing it anymore. That's it.
Please don't. Okay. The way I wanted to end it, this is the way I've been ending all of with everybody, is like words of wisdom and hope for people who want to stay in the church. You know, all I have to give right now is I hate it. It's awful. It's a terrible thing to say, but I kind of stay in the church just out of spite, because I know I'm,
because you're not going to let the bastards win.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Joseph, we've actually talked about this before. I don't know if you remember, but I agree. It's very difficult to walk away from a fight knowing, that it's not over yet.
For you, you've got that personality where you really dig I think, like me, I'm a stubborn person. I think you dig your heels in. The more you trash me and the more you tell me to leave, it's kind of like
that's what wakes me up. Well, when I start lulling is when it just feels like this interminable morass, and I'm like, why am I doing this? What's the point? But then you do something and it pisses me off, and I'm like, let's go, let's do this. So yeah. I don't have words of wisdom, Joseph.
And thank you, Steve. I've said it 100 times, but a handful of good priests, and like you said, about 5 good bishops in the world are keeping me in the church. But it's I have to say, it's been lay Catholic men who are husbands and fathers and you're one of them, definitely, who've been just good examples to me. I mean, you look at Jordan Peterson, you have been kind of like, and others, Patrick Coffin, Taylor Marshall, have been like Jordan Petersons to me, because I watch you and I listen to you. I was like, oh man, there's hope. These guys are hanging in there. I could do it too if I can.
Well, that's humbling. Thank you very much. And what was it that Ben Franklin said? Gentlemen, we'd best join together, or we will surely hang alone.
Yeah. And people struggling need people like you to just give some kind of hope. So thank you.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, God bless you.
You too.